That's my next question is what's the line in the sand? Like what is it that you would say if it got to this point, then I would leave the AG?
In this episode of the Minor Prophets podcast, we address something that hits very close to home for me, and that is the Assemblies of God. There are two stories right now that are in the news about the Assemblies of God, and that is one of Chi Alpha, think Crew or InterVarsity. This is the Assemblies of God campus ministry, an organization that I worked with for 8 years. I pioneered a Chi Alpha chapter at my alma mater. And then another story involving AGWM, which is Assemblies of God World Missions, where now I think it's nearly 200 missionaries have come forward with stories of spiritual abuse that are systemic within Assemblies of God World Missions that must be dealt with. I think it's helpful for the purposes of this conversation to have a definition for spiritual abuse. So this is Michael Kruger's definition. Spiritual abuse then is when a spiritual leader, such as a pastor, elder, or head of a Christian organization, wields his position of spiritual authority in such a way that he manipulates, domineers, bullies, and intimidates those under him as a means of accomplishing what he takes to be biblical and or spiritual goals. Some forms of spiritual abuse can be silencing, dissent. So there have been reports leading up to the General Council of the Assemblies of God that just met last week of leaders within the Assemblies of God warning missionaries not to go on social media, not to speak about what has happened to them, sometimes under threats of punishment. This is spiritual abuse. We can see isolation as a means of punishment. So victims can be isolated from supportive relationships or communities as a form of punishment or control. And also you can see superiority and elitism as a common element of spiritual abuse, where the leaders are way above, they're untouchable, and it's touch not the Lord's anointed sort of mentality that can foster a spiritually abusive situation. So there are spiritual abuse allegations that are rampant throughout AGWM. There's also an issue of sexual abuse that was not responded to appropriately. So we're going to dive into these two stories together. Jeff and I offer some commentary. And then at the end, we make an appeal to the Assemblies of God to hire a third-party investigator to look into both of these situations. Now, the Assemblies of God has investigated these things internally. They hired a lawyer, they say an outside law firm, but the reality is a lawyer has a fiduciary duty to their client to try to protect them from litigation, and all of their communications are protected under attorney-client privilege. So an outside lawyer coming in is not necessarily a third-party investigation. And then there's an internal investigation that has been underway regarding Assemblies of God World Missions. It's good that there is an internal investigation underway, but there also should be a third-party investigation in this as well, because if there is culpability or negligence on behalf of those who are presently in leadership within the Assemblies of God, then I don't know that we can have an investigation where we trust those who are potentially guilty parties to investigate themselves and find themselves innocent. Also, there's a trigger warning on this episode. There's some graphic details that are mentioned in regards to some of the abuse that is perpetrated by Daniel Savala. And so just a heads up on. So having set the table for things and defined what spiritual abuse is, here is the episode.
Welcome to the Minor Prophets podcast. Today's a little bit different. It is just John, Mark, and myself, and we're going to talk about some things that hit a little close to home. Before we do, it's been quite a few weeks of activity and news. So how are you doing?
Bro, my emotions are a roller coaster. So we just did our conference last week for Spirit-Filled House Churches. That was so much fun. We had people come from all over the country. One person, friend of ours, Martina, came from Czech Republic, and she actually shared a little bit about the house church she's begun, where in the last 3 or 4 weeks, they've baptized 6 people in the third most atheistic nation on the planet. God is really moving. They're seeing people come to Christ in wonderful ways, especially among the Roma people that are there in Nové Město pod Smrkem. And so very, very excited. And just really cool what God did at the conference as well. We saw somebody get saved on the street. We sent out some of the people to go and do evangelism after we did some training on evangelism, and one of our house church pastors led a guy to Christ. He's been in contact. He wants to come and check out his church, and we're seeing we saw a few healings as well at the conference, which was really cool.
That's cool. Well, so that's the high. That's the upper part of the roller. Wait, or is the roller? I guess you enjoy the part going down in the roller. Whatever. In the roller coaster of emotions that the
good part of the roller coaster.
That was the good part of the roller coaster. The part that has kind of been in the news lately is what's been happening with the Assemblies of God. Now, for those that don't know, you're part of the Roots House Church Network, which is connected to Assemblies of God, and you're an
That's
Assemblies
right.
of God ordained pastor. And I'm not Nana Boo Boo licensed. Okay.
Yeah. So they give you credentials in 3 sort of stages, So I have been a credentialed minister with the Assemblies of God since 2014. And but I've been in the Assemblies of God my whole life. I'm a 3rd generation Assemblies of God pastor on both sides of my family. I've grown up in the Assemblies of God, except for a very brief stint where I was at a Wesleyan church and a Word of Faith church for a very short amount of time when I was in college. Other than that, I've been in Assemblies of God my whole life.
Now, the 3rd stage of credentials, is it all written out in
Ordained.
tongues? And
Yeah. Well, so you have to take the test that's written in tongues, and you have to interpret it properly in order to
that's how you
get ordained.
That's how you get approved.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's been a couple of stories that have been circulating recently, and there's more that's happening even behind the scenes. So for those of us that aren't on the bleeding edge of the news cycle, what has been happening in the Assemblies of God?
Yeah, man. So basically there's 2 things that are going on. There's actually more than just 2 major things, but the 2 major things are sort of grabbing people's attention right now. NBC reported on a story that is really, it's about 2 years old, that all of this stuff came to the consciousness of the rest of the of everybody, like myself. I heard about what was going on with Chi Alpha, so maybe I should back it up just a little bit. Something's going on with Chi Alpha. It's a ministry I used to be part of. I started a Chi Alpha campus ministry in 2011 as a student at my college, and so I had never been part of a Chi Alpha before, except for the one that I started. So I was very disconnected from the larger Chi Alpha culture until a little bit later, when I did my internship and then became nationally appointed as a Chi Alpha director. And so I did that from 2011 till 2019. When I left, I resigned and came to help plant Roots Church down here in the Metro Detroit area. And so, like, this one really hits close to home. So in 2023, it came out in the news. I believe Roy's Report reported on it, as did other news agencies, organizations, that there was a man named Daniel Savala who had been grooming and SAing young men for a long time, some of them minors. And he had a history of doing that, dating back to his time in Alaska, which was at least the first known report where somebody brought that up in 2010. And he had a thing where he would lure people into the sauna, and from there he would engage in inappropriate activities. But he had a reputation of being what Eli Stewart called the holiest man alive. Eli Stewart was the director of a Chi Alpha down in Texas, and he directed young men to go to Savala's home down in Texas where there was a sauna. And these young men would go for mentorship, and Savala would begin to groom them. And in fact, I have here just a clip from NBC's report that gives you a context of some of the things that were going on. And play this right here.
Cleveland says Savala's openness was revelatory.
I can finally talk about this stuff with somebody who everybody has told me to trust and respect.
But for a decade, Cleveland says Savala took that trust and twisted it.
Probably within a year, he kind of progresses to like oral, where he kind of forces himself on me.
Makes you do that?
Yeah. Every time you talk about it, you relive it. So, and I remember distinctly him grabbing the back of my head and forcing me onto him. Yeah, it's a memory that never goes away.
Now, okay, so Daniel Savala has been doing this for years. He was a lifetime registered offender. This story has recirculated recently, and he was arrested a while ago, along with several other people, I believe.
Yeah, there are a few other people who were indicted due to negligence and for bringing young men over. So there were some key players that were involved here, and this was Eli Gotro and Eli Stewart. These were two leaders of Chi Alpha down in Texas. There are more people that are involved, but those were sort of the key leaders. And I'd never met Eli Stewart. I didn't know really who he was until this story came out. But I had met Eli Gotro. I'd heard him preach. His model for Chi Alpha was that was what was being promoted as the way to go. This is how you make disciples on the college campus. And so Eli Gotro was like Superman, bro. Like he preached the paint off the walls. Like he was an amazing speaker, incredibly charismatic, and led an enormous ministry there in Houston. But he was actively advocating for people to testify to Daniel Savala's character to the judge in the Alaska situation in order to show the judge that Daniel. So I don't know if he believed that the charges were false. I imagine that's the only thing that makes sense, is he just believed them to be false. But what was happening is there was more SA that was happening at the time that he's rallying support of people to write letters on behalf to the judge on behalf of Savala. There's another man, Eli Stewart, and he has a much more direct connection to Savala. He was mentored by Savala, and so anyway, word gets sent to these people that, hey, Savala is abusing people, and he's actively doing so, and he is a registered offender, and you keep sending young men. So that gets passed along to the National Office of the Assemblies of God. So in 2018,
I was gonna say that happened a while ago, right?
Yeah, this happened in 2018. Now, there's a website called XA the Lion's Den, or Chi Alpha the Lion's Den. I can't remember exactly. We'll link it down below. But It's run by a guy named Ron Bloomingkemper, who really has been the primary advocate for what's been going on in Chi Alpha here. So in 2018, national leadership for the Assemblies of God, including Doug Clay, who is the general superintendent of the Assemblies of God in the United States, Donna Barrett, who's the general secretary of the Assemblies of God, Scott and Crystal Martin, who were sort of the executive directors of Chi Alpha nationally, were all made aware of this, as well as a few other folks, through several emails that were sent in 2018 until finally, I guess, according to the website and the emails that are, there's screenshots of the emails that you can see on this website. It was stated no more action will be taken. They sent an email to the local North Texas district, which really oversaw what was happening there, but nothing was done until 5 years later in 2023, when finally Ron Bloomingkemper starts his website. It catches media attention, and there's letters from lawyers sent to the Assemblies of God regarding Daniel Savala, and then suddenly there's action. And that's part of the frustration here, is that they knew for 5 years and they did nothing.
Well, so this kind of gets to the personal part of the interview is, this channel, we've been advocating for transparency and how to address these types of things, and that victims should have a voice, and that we need to resist cover-up culture in mega ministries and denominations. This is in your own backyard. How does that
Some
feel?
of the people I just mentioned are friends of mine. Scott Martin endorsed my book. And I still think highly of Scott and Crystal Martin. But this wasn't good. This wasn't righteousness. And so, there's some tension there for me, for sure. Like, I have only ever had good interactions with the people that I mentioned, and yet I'm seeing some of the actions, or rather inactions, that are happening in regard to Chi Alpha, and it's difficult. Now, when this stuff came out 2 years ago, I thought, well, I left Chi Alpha in 2019. My attitude then was the same as now, when I'm like, oh, so they knew and they didn't do anything until it became public. That's not integrity. So I was annoyed. I was angry. But I had the attitude like, listen, I'm not part of that circus anymore. I'm not part of that show. And so I'm, whatever.
Right. And you didn't have
yeah.
any influence to sway anything at the time.
I didn't anymore, and when I
Right.
left, a lot of any influence that I would have had, which was minimal, I was just a nobody up in northern Michigan, with a tiny Chi Alpha chapter. But it was any influence that I did have was totally gone when I left. So
Now, you mentioned that some of the leaders that were involved in this are people that you know personally. You've seen them, you've had relationships with them. After seeing how they've responded to these allegations, does it affect how much you personally trust them?
well,
Do you still trust the leadership of these Assemblies of God?
well, okay, yeah. So that's another question. So do I trust those people? Some of the people that I had relationships that I mentioned, really the only two were Scott and Crystal Martin, and they're They are now, they're still missionaries with the Assemblies of God. They're now serving somewhere else. But you know, I would like to have seen some ownership. But when we look at what does it look like here for, and as far as I understand, they resigned. I don't know if they were fired, but they resigned from their positions. Maybe they were forced to. I don't know. I don't know any of that story. But do I trust the Assemblies of God leadership? This is the question that I'll answer with this video.
Okay.
And we can see a clip. So since this came out in the news, there has been a response. So we'll count it. Go ahead.
Is this the General Secretary Donna Barrett's comments?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I have some questions for you following this video.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, let's look at it. I'll introduce it here. So, these things were made aware. Were brought to the attention of Donna Barrett, of Doug Clay, and others in 2018. Now it became public in 2023. Action was taken in 2023, and the report on what actions were taken are coming out right after NBC does another reporting on it just 1 week before the General Council. For those of you who don't know anything about the Assemblies of God, the General Council is like the big meeting of a lot of the ministers around the nation of the Assemblies of God. If you're an ordained minister, you can vote. The district superintendents or network superintendents will come, and it's a big sort of meeting place of all of the Assemblies of God ministers. And so this happened down in Orlando, and they do business meetings for the General Council. And last year, or no, 2 years ago, they do this every 2 years. 2 years ago in 2023, someone stood up and shared stories of spiritual abuse that were happening on the mission field and called for an investigation into those things. That's going to come into the next story that we tell after this one. Really, there's two stories that are involved here, but this was Donna Barrett's response to NBC's reportage on this. And so let's watch it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, friends. I'd like to use my minutes with you today to spotlight what has been happening out of the General Secretary's office since the last time we were together in the General Council 2023 in Columbus, Ohio, sharing what I think is most important for you to know and of most interest and information you deserve to hear. I am sad and concerned from all of us for the victims who have suffered due to the sexual misconduct engaged in another situation regarding Chi-Alpha. Due to the sexual misconduct of Daniel Savala, several people were harmed. For every victim who has suffered, we are sorry. We are sorry that they have suffered. And we know that Savala engaged in sexual misconduct with male college students who attended Chi-Alpha chapters and sexually abused up to 4 minors, likely over the course of a decade, by gaining access to some of his victims through individuals who also attended or served in local Chi-Alpha chapters in Texas. Whenever this kind of conduct reaches the consciousness of those in the church and involves any aspect of the church, it rightfully elicits anger and anguish. It hurts the church's witness, and it can bring great harm to those who are victimized. This situation is tragic, and our hearts are broken for those who have been hurt and for the families impacted as a result. While these allegations may be new to some of you, they first surfaced to the General Counsel in the spring of 2023. 2 years ago.
So that's misleading, right?
They
There's
received the written letter in 2018.
multiple of them.
Right.
So here's what she said. She said that these came to the attention of the General Counsel in 2023. And so she's not technically lying there, right? The General Counsel is the broader body of the Assemblies of God. And so she's telling the truth, but what a casual listener might hear is that Assemblies of God leadership became aware of these things in 2023, and that's not true.
And in the formal statement on the AG website, they made those same two statements of, well, we heard about Daniel Savala in 2018, but we didn't have any actual victim statements or accusations against him until 2023. The argument was, well, in 2018, we just found out that he was an offender and he had access to young men, which doesn't.
Yes.
So for 5 years, you did what? Would be my question to them.
Right. Well, that is a question, and it's like everything they said in that statement is true, right? They were made aware of it in 2018. Maybe they didn't have any direct statements from any victims, but they didn't seem to have chased it down too hard, right? And then they said, well, this is a district issue. It's a responsibility for the district to solve these things, and that's technically true as well. So again, technically true, but what did you do in terms of using your authority to leverage pressure upon that district, the North Texas district, and these leaders under your purview? So the Assemblies of God is meant to be sort of decentralized, where it's like the districts, they try to give as much autonomy on the most local level possible. And that's good, I think, actually. That's a really good model. But there has been some drift recently towards centralization within the culture of the Assemblies of God. And, for better or for worse, right? I'll say this: Chi Alpha there was a lot of say that the national director of Chi Alpha had in local directors. Part of the things that's going on here is that Chi Alpha guys, they actually all missionaries with the Assemblies of God, they have to raise their own support, but all that support passes through the Assemblies of God's 501c3 and is managed by that organization. And they take off certain things from the top. They take off a half tithe plus an administrative fee from the money before it ever gets into your bank account. And then they deposit it, and then they 1099 you as an independent contractor, but they control your finances as though you're W-2. And they also sort of control your employment in kind of a more top-down hierarchical way as though you are W-2. And so there's some questions to be had about the financial position that puts missionaries in, and whether that's really an ethical situation. So all that aside, the national office has a lot of authority over any Chi Alpha chapter.
Well, a couple of kind of points of contrast between, so XA Lions Den is the website that you referenced, that I have the chronology pulled up. There was an investigation against Savala in 2016 by the university. There was a report given to the University of SA against him. So it wasn't just in 2018 that, oh, he's a registered offender from some time in the past. There's active investigations and complaints happening against him. and the responses from the AG said that there was no indication of anything but positive interactions. No further actions will be taken. That was in June 1st, 2018. And then in June 15th, they said it's not in our purview. Go to the authorities. So the reason I mention that is in the same way as we scrutinize some of the responses to things like, some of these other stories of Dr. Brown and Bickle and those types of investigations that we've looked at. To say that you weren't aware, that nobody was aware, is not accurate. To say that they weren't made aware until 2023. Like you said, it's factually, they're making factual statements, but they're representing, it's making a broad representation as though they're not culpable, when as though no individuals had any awareness of what's going on, and that's not true. People had been made aware.
Right.
A couple of things from Donna Barrett's statements. So she said,
do we want to finish a little bit of it? There's a little bit more I want to.
Sure. Yeah. Let's show the rest of it.
Yeah, I don't want to play the whole thing, but there's a few more pertinent things she says.
Yeah.
When we were moving into general counsel, the authorities, the general counsel, and 2 districts in Texas were still completing their reviews, and the districts had not made recommendations as to any discipline of those people who had credentials. I can share with you that the general counsel completed a thorough and objective investigation by an outside law firm with experience in these type of matters to determine if general counsel officials acted responsibly and appropriately. The review at the national level focused on what knowledge national officials had, when they had it, and what they did with that knowledge. The attorney had unfettered access to witnesses, emails, documents, law enforcement, and set up an email for reports to be sent directly to him to remain confidential. The attorney interviewed dozens of witnesses, including victims who agreed to participate. The review was not directed by the general counsel. The findings of this investigation were presented to the Executive Presbytery in full. The Executive Presbytery is the body who oversees the business of the General Counsel and has a fiduciary duty as a board of directors would. The North Texas and South Texas districts also investigated what occurred and recommended the dismissal of ministry credentials of those involved. The General Counsel followed those recommendations. Now, as a voluntary cooperative fellowship, the districts and churches in Texas are separate entities. The General Counsel has influence in the areas of doctrine, the credentialing of ministers, and the chartering of churches. The National Chi Alpha Office is a part of the General Counsel and provides resources to local chapters. But the General Counsel has no legal authority over attendees of local churches and ministries or the policies and procedures they have in place. It did not provide day-to-day supervision of Chi Alpha ministries. Again, though Daniel Savala has had ties to some affiliated ministries and churches, he never held credentials with the Assemblies of God or the General Counsel. He never served on staff of Chi Alpha, and the General Counsel never endorsed him, his teachings, or his activities. Indeed, it does not appear that the General Counsel even knew who he was until 2018. Savala had long-standing friendships with a handful of local Chi Alpha leaders in Texas who were credentialed ministers. And it appears one of those ministers, Eli Stewart, helped Daniel Savala gain access to young men and to conceal his crimes and his 2012 Alaska conviction. He also convinced some in Chi Alpha that Savala was innocent of those charges. The Alaska conviction, which caused Savala to be classified as a registered sex offender, was based on an incident that had nothing to do with the Assemblies of God. While Eli Stewart later claimed to have also been deceived, Stewart's influence was undeniably critical in Savala's ability to engage in sexual misconduct and child abuse.
So,
Hmm.
yeah. Go ahead, and you have some questions.
Well, I don't think you're going to be able to answer them, but I'm going to ask them as I would of any other statement like this. So making the statement that we're sorry is nice, but what are you showing? What are you doing to show that you're sorry? And there's biblical precedent for this, right? Of, if you walk past somebody that's cold and you just say, "I'll pray for you." This is the Jeff translation. I'm paraphrasing. You just say, "I'll pray for you," and you don't actually do
When's
something.
that going to be available in print?
It's right up there with the millennial translation, which is it's a trip to go read it.
It's lit.
Yeah, no cap. the I can't even say that without laughing at myself. I'm way too old for that phrase. It's platitudes are one thing, but what are you actually doing to support the victims? She mentions how long this went on. There's a lot of victims. So what are the active things that are being done to help them to get restored?
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I do know from a source that is credible that Chi Alpha is making very important strides in setting their culture towards a much more healthy way, eliminating spiritual abuse to the best of their ability, doing education, training all of their personnel on these things. I know the person is a licensed counselor that is doing training for Chi Alphas all around on spiritual abuse and trying. They're trying to set the ship right when it comes to culture within Chi Alpha. I know about that, but that's not the same as making whole those who were hurt through your own inaction and negligence.
Right, because you could. Well, I want to give credit where credit is due. So taking preventative actions to avoid it from happening in the future is good. To somebody that is looking at that with a skeptical view, you could see how that's actions that benefit the organization. What are you doing to benefit the individuals that were harmed by the organization's inaction? That's right. It's good to take those steps, but I would say that's probably not sufficient if you were to ask a victim. And in fact, if you go on the Lion's Den forum, you'll see there's a lot of similar sentiment that is out there. The statement about the investigation, they said we performed a thorough and an objective investigation by hiring a law firm.
They say outside law firm.
Well, yeah, okay.
Wait.
So you hired,
that word is used intentionally,
right? So you hired a law firm, which is now has the term fiduciary responsibility. That law firm now has a fiduciary responsibility to protect its client. That's so right. You're saying it was thorough and that it was objective. Well, if you hired them and they work for you, I would say that it's probably unlikely to be objective. And
well, even if it was objective, it's a lawyer and their communications are protected by attorney-client privilege.
Even if the lawyer, if the attorney says, these are all the things that I found, they're the worst things ever, and they have to give it back to their client, they have the responsibility is it's protected under attorney-client privilege. So then the representatives of AG can then go out and make a statement and say, we checked and everything's fine. And by the way, we're not going to release it and we're not going to tell you what happened. And the reason that was given was, well, we need to protect victims' privacy, which, again, I'm going to say no, you can release it and protect victims' privacy. We've seen plenty of reports released where you protect victims' privacy. The and then you have to ask the question, okay, so why? Why would the AG say that they did this investigation, but they're not going to release any of the results of the investigation? And it's because they want to protect the reputation of the organization. Most likely, that's
right.
That's me presuming and coming to a conclusion, but I think it's the obvious logical conclusion.
And even if it's totally above board, let's say it's like, hey, everything that Donna Barrett said is 100% factually true. And you know what? It probably is. Here's some things though that are concerning anyway. One is that she said that the report was released in full to the executive presbytery. So the executive presbytery, which works sort of as a board for the Assemblies of God, has seen that report in full. But they're not going to release that because it has sensitive testimonies from victims in there. Well, I don't see any victims clamoring to keep their testimonies private, but maybe there are, right? There are at least some victims that are saying, "Hey, my testimony is on NBC News," and many have come forward on the XA Lions Den forum. There's a way to release this amount, the right appropriate amount of information, even that sort of is embarrassing to the organization, without harming victims if they don't want their testimonies made public. You saw this with the Firefly report and Dr. Brown. Now, here's the thing. Let's say everything is totally above board with what Donna Barrett was saying there. Everything's right. The fact that it is a law firm that is doing the investigation erodes trust immediately, because it could be that, as you pointed out, Jeff, lawyers have a fiduciary duty to their clients, not to the truth. And so if they were to hire a true third party like Grace to come in and look at these things, there would be an actual independent report, because the only thing that we have that's public in terms of the national office's actions is just filtered through the national office. Any communication from that report is filtered through the national office. And by the way, Donna Barrett's report, as far as anyone can tell, is not available in any official Assemblies of God forum. You have to go to XA Lions Den or to Julie Roy's to watch it, and that's concerning,
right?
In of itself. So,
right, they didn't stream it on anywhere. The XA Lions Den, there's 19 stories, individual testimonies of which I don't even know what's in all of these. Some of them have 3 people, 4 people, 5 people in them, but 19 different victim stories that are on this forum. So just to put things in perspective for the viewers, that's more than Bickle. That's that's just what's on this one forum. So if there is some kind of investigation, we're talking about something that is a substantial amount of information. Again, that is assuming positive intent on the investigation itself. I would say without having a website out there where victims could actually put things in and file stuff, you're limiting the individual victims to be hearsay from other people, which doesn't. A lot of times victims stay quiet and they don't talk about those things, especially when it's young boys and men. well, it's not exclusive to that, but there's an extra measure of shame when it comes to men bringing those types of stories forward. Here's the other thing that I would say is, so we don't know the scope of the investigation. We don't know how it was conducted. We don't know how stories were corroborated and how they were verified and what the evidence was. All of that is obfuscated by a general statement. And this is the kind of stuff that when you have an investigation, if you release the information, it actually helps people to heal. And this is something I want to emphasize is how these situations get handled. It can either alleviate or contribute to the trauma that the victims experience. If you handle it well, there's a sense of relief. There's a sense of, okay, things are going to change and get better. And Joseph Cleveland, who was the one that you showed the video of from NBC, he says at the end of that he hopes things are going to get better, but he doesn't think it will. And it's because of his experience with the AG leadership.
Right. And it's because there's a big old 5-year gap in between when they were first made aware and when things actually were done. And if we go into the North Texas district, I listened to a podcast that's on the Lion's Den between Ron Bloomingkemper and Anthony Scoma, who was a presbyter in the North Texas district, and who was made aware of these things, and he began to call for things to be changed immediately. He's a Chi Alpha alum, and he met his wife in Chi Alpha. He's a big time Chi Alpha proponent, but he saw what was happening with Eli Stewart. He tried to confront it, and he shows up to a presbytery meeting to deal with the things with Eli Stewart. And this is in 2023. He has no idea about the 2018 emails. He doesn't know any of this is happening. But the district officials show up to this meeting of the presbytery, which is basically the board of the organization. Think of the presbytery as sort of being your board. And they show up with a lawyer. And then they're forced to sign NDAs, and they cannot have any devices for recording. And Anthony Scoma fought tooth and nail, but the only way that this meeting was ever going to happen was if he agreed to these stipulations. And so he said it was wicked and wrong, but he was forced to sign this NDA. He said, in his opinion, by the way, this is the culture that is supposed to be in which we're supposed to trust these types of leaders to be bringing accountability to these types of things. And so he said the things that were revealed in that meeting, many people would have lost their jobs many times over. And so it's not exactly a culture of openness and transparency.
Well, let me ask a little bit of a different question. So, this is just one of the stories that has been circulating. There's another story that has also been circulating about the AG.
Yeah.
And
it hits even closer to home.
I was going to say that's closer to home for you. So, for those that have only maybe heard the story about Savala, what is and Chi Alpha, what's the other story?
Yeah, so the week before General Counsel, there's a man named Dr. Grant Jones who he came out with a statement that kind of lit the Assemblies of God world on fire. And I'll just it's long, but maybe I can read some of it and sum it up. He had over 80 missionaries come to him of reports of spiritual abuse within Assemblies of God World Missions, or AGWM, particularly within a sort of a subgroup of that. It's like branding. I don't understand exactly what it is, but there's a movement within AGWM called Live Dead, which was pioneered by a guy named Dick Brogden. I have some experience with Live Dead. I went on a missions trip with Live Dead when I was a Chi Alpha intern. We went to Egypt for a week, and Live Dead really existed to try to champion missionaries to go to the 1040 window, really minister in the Muslim world. And it's one of those movements that is incredibly intense and austere. One thing that happened while we were there is one of the missionaries kind of suggested that we should be drinking the water, and that because it was filtered, but there were parasites, and we all got really sick, and one of our team actually was hospitalized because of on the trip, because of they followed the missionary's advice and drank the water.
What was the logic behind drinking the water?
Well, the logic was the locals drink it, and you should live like the locals, and this is what makes missionaries tough. This would kind of make us good good missionaries.
I'm
You know?
gonna chime in with some generic missionary advice. Don't do that, and also don't eat food that, if you don't know it's been cooked. Not depending on where you are, not everybody washes their hands, and you could be eating stuff that you don't want to be eating. So, if you got faith for it and you're living there, and the Lord tells you to eat something, follow your conviction. If you don't have a conviction, don't be afraid to use common sense.
But needless to say, I was there. I saw the culture that was present. It was very austere. You know, you're supposed to tithe your time. Let's leave aside the fact that tithing is not a New Testament commandment. But not only are you supposed to tithe your money to God, they insisted on you spending 2.5 hours every single day in prayer and reading the Bible. And will you benefit from that? Sure, but if your employment is dependent upon that, and you do that or else, this is not exactly a life-giving sort of environment.
So the 2.5 hours, is this for the 24-hour period to make sure that it's exactly one attempt?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay. So you experienced it. So what has?
Yeah.
There was a post that went viral, and now a lot of people are talking about it. So what was? You started to give the summary of the
sorry.
the post.
Yeah. Okay. So I've seen so many. I've seen many of these instances myself, but a lot of the reports of spiritual abuse that have come out, there's now I think nearly 200 different missionaries have come forward with their own stories of spiritual abuse while on the mission field, and a large majority of them have come from Live Dead. This very austere, tithe your time, you can drink the water, sort of a place led by a guy named Dick Brogden. Now, I'm just going to read a little bit of Dr. Grant Jones's post that lit the world on fire. He says, "My story begins with a meeting with my pastor, Dr. James Bradford, on June 12th, 2023. During this meeting, I asked for some direction on how I should proceed with the 10 spiritual abuse stories that I had received. I was told that I must meet with the AG General Superintendent, Doug Clay, since the reports involved accusations about AGWM leadership. I met with General Superintendent Clay. The meeting took place 11 days later on June 23rd, 2023. During our time together, I shared some of the reports with him. These reports included a documented report from within Global University, also a part of AGWM, concerning the president being unfit to lead due to an external survey of GU employees, this Global University, which concluded a toxic work culture was present. Superintendent Clay thanked me and said he would take care of these reports. 2 weeks later, I asked Superintendent Clay what had happened with the report shared with him. He informed me that he had turned everything over to AGWM Executive Director Greg Mundis, now retired. Now it's John Easter who's in charge there. I was shocked since I had shared confidential information with Superintendent Clay. Nonetheless, I met with Executive Director Mundis on July 7th, and we reviewed some of the stories. He asked me to get some more stories and said that he would investigate them after the 2023 General Council, which was August 2nd through the 4th. On July 27th, after interviewing 30 more missionaries who had sought me out, I sent Executive Director Mundis my findings. During this time, some missionaries shared their personal stories directly with Executive Director Mundis, as he had requested. However, after General Council, Executive Director Mundis informed me that all the data reports and stories that he had given were now with General Secretary Barrett, due to a motion during General Council to investigate reports of spiritual abuse in AGWM. On August 21st, 2023. There's a whole story behind that motion too. A guy got up and shared about what happened in spiritual abuse with Live Dead and on the mission field. And there was a verbal conflict in the hallways, I guess, afterwards, because of the backlash that the guy who blew the whistle on this from the floor of the house, the super brave dude, but he faced intense backlash for it. So anyway, on August 21st, 2023, I contacted General Secretary Barrett and asked if she had all of the material that I had sent to Executive Director Mundis and to see if I could assist with the investigation. She answered yes and asked me to send the names of people willing to be interviewed by their investigation team. I did. She repeated this request on August 31st, 2023. I gave her the names of around 10 missionaries who were willing to be interviewed. On September 20th, 2023, a missionary shared his detailed story with her team, including PDF documents, direct personal evidence, and suggested solutions. On December 18th, 2023, General Secretary Barrett informed me that no more submissions would be considered in the investigation process and that her team had the information they needed to move into the next phase. This response surprised me. Why wouldn't she want more stories to get the full extent of the abuse? In January 2024, she continued to turn down submissions from abused missionaries who were attempting to share their stories with her. General Secretary Barrett then requested a Zoom meeting with me, which included one of her team members. This meeting was to update me on the investigation. The meeting took place on December 22nd, 2024, and lasted an hour. I was thrilled to have this meeting. I was grateful to share my entire story from the beginning to the present. During our conversation, the definition of spiritual abuse was also shared and discussed. He uses Michael Kruger's definition from the book Bully Pulpit. We can get into the definition of spiritual abuse in a moment. I was grateful to share my entire journey from beginning to present. The definition of spiritual abuse was shared and discussed. Following is a summary of what I shared with General Secretary Barrett and a team member. 1, I never went fishing for stories of spiritual abuse in AGWM, as many in leadership had stated in their official letters and emails to missionaries. These missionary units sought me out due to word-of-mouth conversations with other missionaries. Only after a missionary contacted me did I send them a template they could use to help give structure to their trauma story, if they so desired. A few missionaries already had the template that had been given to them by others. All the stories that I had were first-hand accounts told to me. They did not come to me second or third hand. Many of those who shared with me were in tears and being triggered by reliving their story. Many shared shared that it was the first time they felt comfortable sharing their story, I made sure they had aftercare. I also shared that most stories came from the Live Dead missionaries. It was noted that there were more stories of spiritual abuse coming from Live Dead teams than any other system or program combined. Note, one missionary support agency, Agape Hope, sent a letter of concern dated October 2022 to AGWM leadership, which indicated that they were treating 10 missionary units with severe mental health issues, including PTSD, and that all 10 had come from a Live Dead situation. By the way, I have spoken to to some former Live Dead missionaries, and I asked them, like, hey, what is it that made it so hard about Live Dead? Was it that you were ministering in a difficult area? I mean, if you're in the Muslim world, there's obviously going to be strictures. There's going to be stuff that's going to be hard. Living there is tough. Like, just uprooting your family, moving. I know somebody who gave birth to children in the Middle East. It's like, it's tough. It's not easy. His response to me is that the organization, Live Dead and AGWM, made things 100 times more difficult for him than the mission field had ever made it. It was a lack of transparency when it came to the finances. It was, you have to come to this meeting, you have to go to that meeting, you have to go to this meeting, and you have to go to that meeting. Some people, their stories, I've now read many of the stories, and it's just horrific that it's like the humanity of these people were stripped, and they were just made into meeting attending machines for Live Dead. Live Dead was incredibly effective at recruiting missionaries. I did not see a lot of efficacy when it came to actual evangelization and the spread of the gospel. One of the things that happened when I was there for a week, I saw someone healed at a mosque, and I prayed for this guy. He had injured his wrist, and his wrist was totally healed. And he looks at me, he goes, "Why?" And I got to explain the gospel to him, why he had gotten healed. This happened as the call to prayer is going out at this mosque. And it was super cool. He didn't repent of his sins and become a Christian right then, but it really was so significant for him. And so this happened on the trip while I was there. I come back and I attend this missions conference sort of thing. And there were some missionaries that were with Live Dead that were at this thing. And I hear them share my story of what had happened as if it was like a thing that had happened for their Live Dead team. But I was only there for a week. And I'm like, you don't have any other stories? Like, is there no one else is coming to Christ? No one else is sharing the gospel. In fact, while we were there, because we had been trying to hey, let's go out and share the gospel. We're here. This is a missions trip. Ostensibly, this is why we came. We thought maybe we would be doing some missions or something. And I understand the sensitivity. Like, if you're, if you're in a Muslim majority context, you gotta not just be willy-nilly sending off people who are there on a week-long trip. I totally get that. So, but they sent us off anyway. We went out. We had short interactions that didn't really come to anything. And one of the gals there, who is sort of in charge of a lot of the evangelism or something there, was sort of like, yeah, see, it was like, this is why we don't do evangelism. It was a very difficult situation.
Well, yeah, we could probably do, and we probably should do, an episode on short-term missions and the efficacy of them, and how they can be effective and how they cannot be. I've had a couple conversations with people, and I have been on trips where I felt like I was more on vacation than it was actually accomplishing something for Jesus. But there's, in this story, so again, I want to try to frame things in a certain perspective. A lot of times in these different scenarios, when, for example, we talked about Sean Foyt, the thing that is most painful to victims is often the spiritual abuse component. And while there's other things that could be pointed to as, oh, this is clearly and definitively a bad action, an illegal action, a sinful action, however you're going to label it. When people are in positions of authority, representative of the Lord, and then they act in a way that directly contradicts the nature of God and mistreat people, it's often one of the more painful things. Now, you have stories that are close to home on this. We'll probably do a follow-up episode on this. There's, I think in the Post, Dr. Jones mentions over 80 missionaries. It's
yes, and now it's almost over 200. But he ends his post with a few stories, and this might help people understand exactly what's going on. One, a veteran missionary of 25 plus years doing great kingdom work was sent to Siberia in retaliation for speaking out against coercive leadership practices targeting missionary colleagues on certain teams in the region. She was directed to write a non-disclosure statement promising not to speak any further of her concerns. 2, a team leader, a team that included women and children in a war-torn country with rebels advancing in their city, repeatedly requests to leave the country, and the answer from leadership was, stay and don't give in to fear. The Lord is with you. Now they struggle with PTSD. 3, missionaries at a regional retreat were told by leadership that if they don't commit to reaching Muslims in unreached people groups, that they are second-class missionaries. They also instructed the gathering not to let their children get in the way of doing kingdom work. If you have to violate the principles of the kingdom to build the kingdom of God, you are not building the kingdom of God. All our efforts to get help from the mistreated missionaries has failed to this point. This document is about getting help for the 80-plus missionaries who were spiritually abused by AGWM personnel, and also to prevent this from happening to current and future missionaries. These missionaries are great men and women of God who served faithfully, expertly, honorably, and sacrificially in their missionary assignments. They were not rebellious, disobedient, or demeaning of leadership. However, many now question their spiritual identity, their spiritual calling, or if they really want to serve the Lord in ministry anymore. Many have left AGWM. In my professional judgment, and he is a professional psychologist, in my professional judgment, this is why spiritual abuse can be the most destructive form of abuse, since people can walk away from their salvation. We are glad Dr. Easter published his growth report, even though the term spiritual abuse is not used. By the way, he mentions in this report, and this whole thing you can read yourself. It's going to be linked below in the video. He talks about some good things that AGWM is leaning into here. But the reality is, it's still happening. And I know of personal stories where justice has not been done. I have seen it happen up close and personal, the spiritual abuse that has happened within AGWM. And my appeal to AGWM is, please do not do an internal investigation on this, absolve yourself of wrongdoing, and then say, we did nothing wrong, but we're making changes. You know, like, okay, if you did nothing wrong, why are you making changes? This is kind of the Chi Alpha line. We did nothing wrong. We're making changes, so it'll never happen again.
But none of the wrong things that never happened will never happen again.
Exactly. Yeah. But this is my appeal. Please hire an outside independent investigator like Grace, that can actually look at this from a systemic point of view. And by the way, systemic doesn't mean systematic. Systemic means that it's part of the way that people are trained, and it's part of the soup you swim in. I have personal experiences where I have had to repent to people for spiritual abuse because I was part of a system that trained me a certain way, and there was pressure that was put on me that made me feel like absolute nothing if I wasn't performing. And so this pressure drove me to put pressure on those that I led. This is when I was part of Chi Alpha. And I ended up subjecting people under my care to spiritual abuse, for which I have had to reach out and repent. This is maybe a year and a half ago. I realized exactly what I had done to hurt this one particular student. I've mentioned it before on the podcast, actually, that I had pressured her to come to my student leader training thing, and she had vacation with her family. And so I removed her from leadership because she wasn't part of the thing that she needed to be part of in order to be a leader. And I thought I was doing the right thing because that was what was modeled for me. And instead of allowing her to enjoy a vacation with her family, because she's a sophomore in college and it's summer break and she's wanting to go on vacation, I didn't allow her that. And she was leading people into discipleship, brand new believers, and their discipleship totally ceased because of my poor leadership. That happened because of training that had been put on me. This is what is meant by systemic. So some people balk at that word, systemic spiritual abuse. And the word systemic does not mean systematic. Systematic means that there's a system that is built with the intention of perpetrating abuse on people. That's not what we're talking about here. Systemic means that it's part of the soup that we swim in. And so if it's like 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or even 10 people that have been spiritually abused, that's really bad. But you might be thinking like, hey, maybe there's just a couple of bad apples. But if there's now like nearly 200 or so missionaries that have come forward with stories of spiritual abuse, maybe there's something in the water. Maybe there's something about the way that we think about leadership that needs to change. Yeah, parasites. Bro, my digestion was messed up for like 2 years. It was messed up for like 2 years, dude.
Oh, okay. So missionary advice, I'm just throwing these tidbits out. If you're in a place that has bad parasites, get the anti-parasitic medication from that country, because they will have stuff that you're not going to have in the US.
Yeah.
Just
Just
little heads up, unless you want to have 2 years of digestion issues.
Yeah, which I did.
Let me ask you a different question. So this is a little bit of a subtext for this entire episode, and it's something that we've talked about off air. I don't know how much we've talked about as much on air, but you know, when it comes to speaking out on these kinds of things, as an itinerant minister, it's affected your ministry. When it came to speaking out for me at a couple of the churches I was involved in, it affected ministry and ministerial relationships and those types of things. There's a certain cost to speaking out. You're now speaking out against your own denomination. Have you given full consideration into what that might mean if I forget her name, Donna
Barrett,
if she sees this podcast and she says, you know what, we need to pull credentials again. Like,
yeah, well, I mean, if you know, evidently it might take 5 years or so, but
you're asking for it now.
No, the reality is, like, I'm not against Donna Barrett. Yes, the people who have been negligent, they need to face consequences for their negligence. Those who protected abusers and circled the wagons around their favorite ministers, those people need to face consequences. When it comes to me, like, you know, whatever, bro. Like, I've already started this podcast. I'm already too far down this road, dude. Like, I don't care. I've thought very hard about, do I leave this denomination?
That's my next question is, what's the line in the sand? Like, what is it that you would say if it got to this point, then I would leave the AG?
I don't know what it is. I think that for me, I know plenty of really, really good, solid leaders within the Assemblies of God. It is a vast organization. It is the largest Pentecostal denomination on the planet, one of the largest, if not the largest, missions organizations on the planet. I know so many people that have had nothing but good encounters with Assemblies of God, World Missions, missionaries that have been missionaries for decades that have only had support from the Assemblies of God. I believe in the Assemblies of God. I love the Assemblies of God. But I've also thought I do not want to partner with an organization that's going to treat people this way. And so for me, it's a tough call, but I guess my thinking now is I can stay and advocate for change from within, and also do things like this podcast, which, might hinder that somewhat. I don't know if it will or not, but nothing was done until in the Chi Alpha situation and in the Assemblies of God World Missions situation until public pressure was applied. And so I'm not opposed to applying public pressure through this platform. But the reality is, like, if I see positive changes begin soon, I'm going to take that as a sign that I should stay. And that maybe we can reform, and maybe we can begin to create a healthier culture where missionaries are well treated. And listen, the spiritual abuse is not relegated to the mission field, for sure. There are all kinds of local Assemblies of God churches where I'm sure that there is spiritual abuse that has happened, just like there is in pretty much any church that you could go to. I imagine there's some form of that. But if there is a willingness to take this seriously in the coming year, I guess I don't know what my timeline is, but if I see good movement within the coming year, I'm going to stay. And I'm going to seek my third level of credentials. I'm going to seek ordination, and so that I can be part of the solution. But if I don't see that, then I'm out.
Well, I mean, ultimately, as and we all know this as Christians, our loyalty is first and foremost to Jesus. So when there's conflict between the leadership and guidance of Jesus in an organization, the problem is not with Jesus.
That's right.
And at the same time, leaving, there's potential pitfalls to leaving large organizations that have a lot of resources for pastors and ministry leaders. There's different things that are available in those denominational settings that, in a healthy organization, there's accountability and all of those types of things to help the structure of the body of Christ. And, as we've said on here, the solution is not going to be finding the perfect structure for the church. It's how do we respond to these situations as Jesus would. So I got to tell you, it's a tough spot that you're in. I don't envy it. And the good news is the Unitarians are always looking for ministers. So, if you, they'll take anybody.
Probably not Trinitarians. Yeah, man. I have on this podcast said that structures create the possibility of accountability, and that's true. But if the structure won't itself be accountable, then then it's nothing. And so the reality is, for there to be integrity, there's got to be people of integrity. The gospel has to do its work in people's lives. If salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's good for nothing except to be thrown out into the street. Salt has its effect in the world because of the intrinsic properties inherent to its nature. This is what Jesus is talking about in the Sermon on the Mount when he begins to talk about the kingdom of God having its effect in your heart, so that you become the type of person transformed by the Spirit that loves your enemies and prays for those who persecute you, blesses those who curse you. And so as the kingdom of God has its effect on your heart, then you begin to have that effect everywhere you go. You become salt. You become light. And so light's not trying to shine. It's not trying to be shiny. It's just light. And so for an organization to be a good organization, it has to be comprised of good people in whom the gospel has had its effect. And so my hope is that is exactly what happens, is we become good people who are accountable, who say sorry when we're wrong, who do not try to defend ourselves and protect our institutions over and above the people that those institutions have run over, like a bus. And I feel like this is my appeal, Assemblies of God. Please do not seek to defend yourselves. Do not listen to your lawyers more than you listen to the Spirit of the living God. Do not hide behind legalese and technicalities, and escape your own culpability and negligence in some of these situations. Say sorry when you need to. Say sorry not just for how people feel. Say sorry for the way that your actions have affected people. No, none of us are above that rule. All of us have hurt people. And by the way, I just want to say this about spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse is not the unpardonable sin. Spiritual abuse is what happens oftentimes unintentionally when people don't recognize that the power that they have and the way that they are affecting those under their leadership. And so sometimes it is done intentionally, and in those cases, it's of course much more egregious. But the vast majority of spiritual abuse cases are just bad theology as it pertains to leadership, bad training, and an endorsement of narcissists and a promotion of narcissists within ministry circles. And so, like, if you feel like the abuse word scares you too much, that you feel like, oh, if I admit to the fact that I have engaged in spiritual abuse, that I'm literally Satan, I just confessed to my own in this podcast. Like, if you have leadership, anybody who is a leader has spiritually abused somebody at some point. So the issue is not just the hurt. Now, sometimes some of these people, their credentials do need to be pulled. Some of these accounts are just egregious, and the people need to lose their jobs. But the reality is, like, a lot of these it's just ignorance. And if you have abused someone under your care, if you've been negligent in caring for somebody, if you know you've wounded somebody, reach out and be reconciled to them. Humble yourself and repent. This is the kingdom way.
Yeah, and for those that maybe the AGWM story, if you have a similar story, if you have some questions, Dr. Grant has a email address. If you have questions, you can email him at spiritual.abuse.stories.grant@gmail.com. We'll include the link in the description. Or if you have stories relevant to what happened at Chi Alpha, Julie Royce, Rebecca Hopkins, at Roy's Report at julieroyce.com. Those are some resources that you can share your stories with. You can leave a comment if you have a question for us also. Happy to pray with you. And if you've been through something that is along these lines, we'll do the best that we can to help or connect you with resources that can. Spiritual abuse is a hard thing to kind of overcome, because a lot of times there's disillusionment between what's God and what's not. So, and just to echo your final thoughts, mine was, if I would hope that when it comes to the AGWM stories, that they would not repeat the same mistake that the AG made with the Chi Alpha of don't just hire an attorney, don't just hire a law firm, hire an outside organization that will protect the victims, that will be thorough in releasing the investigation, and that will actually help the organization to make positive changes rather than just appeal to PR.
Yeah. Yeah. And my admonition is that you can do this investigation yourself, but if you're to find that you've done nothing wrong, everyone's just going to think, oh, we did it. You investigated yourself. And so imagine, okay, if it is in such a case that, hey, nothing wrong was done, if we were to look at the Chi Alpha situation and a truly independent investigator were to find, hey, you know what? Nothing wrong was done. At least that is an actual third-party independent investigation that is exonerating AG leadership. But if the AG leadership just sticks with what they've done with the lawyer and this internal investigation that they're not releasing, the conclusions can't be trusted, and so it's something that we need to not just do the right thing. We also need to be seen to be doing the right thing. And so this is my call. Please get a third-party investigator to look at AGWM. Get a third-party investigator to look at the general counsel and the national office as it pertains to the Chi Alpha situations. And let's look at our systems and let's try to become abuse resistant. That the Assemblies of God might actually be a fellowship that would be a model for a denomination that's doing something right as it pertains to spiritual abuse, as it pertains to some of these cultural reforms that must happen. I think that we're in a position where we can humble ourselves and do something right.
Amen. Well, John Mark, any final thoughts? Anything else for?
Those are my final thoughts, man.
That's it. There's probably going to be some more to this story with the AGWM and some follow up, but hopefully we can add in some other stuff.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can share about some testimonies of some of the good things that God's been doing. And man, there's so many good ones. And actually, I've talked to some of our friends from Czech Republic, and I want to get them on the podcast and share the story. It's a miraculous story of what God has done with what used to be a concentration camp that is now a camp that is being used to make disciples, and just crazy stuff going on in Czech Republic. People getting born again, saved. There's healings. Somebody was, partially deaf in one ear and got her hearing back. Like,
wait, don't tell all the
cool
stories
stuff.
now.
I'm not. Those aren't even it, man. So we're gonna. I think we're gonna have them come on. It's gonna be a really good episode. So
cool. All right. Well, thank you all for watching. We'll catch you again next week.